Hello, my name is Dan, I am a professional animator, and this is New Frame Plus. The remake of Final Fantasy VII is here, and it is affording us all a very rare opportunity, the chance to see a classic, beloved game updated to modern AAA standards. To see it not just remastered, but reimagined from the ground up. Every single asset, every gameplay system, and every story sequence reconsidered and built from scratch. As an animator, that last one makes me real excited. Consider the potential here. These animators and directors and performers have the opportunity not just to make these scenes prettier, but to flesh out their character performances and cinematography with a level of nuance that the original game simply was not capable of. To show you what I mean, I'm going to do a deep dive into the animation of just the opening title sequence in both versions of the game, starting with the 1997 original. It's easy to forget looking at it now, but Final Fantasy VII was a technological leap in its own right. The first game in this franchise to leave those familiar 8 and 16-bit roots behind in favor of Sony's new PlayStation and all of the shiny new 3D graphics it was capable of. But these big hardware transitions always come with some growing pains, and Final Fantasy VII is loaded with them. The title sequence begins as an FMV cinematic, basically a pre-rendered video. The ability to store movie files on disk was one of the more exciting new features of the PlayStation's CD-ROM format. We open on a field of stars, the camera lazily drifting around in space for probably 20 seconds longer than necessary, and then we crossfade to a medium close-up shot of a woman's face bathed in eerie green light. And I should probably just go ahead and say that the character animation in Final Fantasy VII's pre-rendered cutscenes is just terrible. They've got poor body mechanics, no sense of weight, dead-eyed expressions everywhere. The craft of animation is fundamentally about taking something not alive, like a drawing or a CG model, and creating the illusion of life in that thing. And you will rarely see that illusion work in these scenes. Now, this failing is completely understandable. CG animation was still in its very early days at this point, and Squaresoft's cinematic animators would quickly find their feet over the next few years, so no disrespect towards them. Honestly, nobody in 1997 was delivering great CG character animation in their pre-rendered cutscenes. But, this first effort's pretty rough though. So then we cut to a new angle, and we see that this woman's kneeling down in some sort of dark alley looking at something, although we can't really see what that glowing green something is. And it's here that we can see that Aerith's character model is actually segmented, constructed of several separate pieces of overlapping geometry. You can see the most obvious seams here at her elbow joint and there at her waist. Now, this is actually how all of Final Fantasy VII's in-game character models are constructed too. It was a pretty common character modeling approach in those really early 3D days when deforming a character mesh with an animated skeleton of joints in real time was just a lot for that early hardware to handle. Of course, animation in a pre-rendered movie isn't bound by those real-time processing concerns, so I'm guessing that this segmented character model being used here is just an artifact of those real early Wild West days of CG animation where everybody was still trying to figure out the basics. Guards! And it's also in this shot that we get our first taste of Final Fantasy VII's full-body character animation, which, like I said before, not great. You see the way she finishes standing up and then starts straightening her back while her hips just stay completely locked in place? That sort of isolated motion is how machines move, but not how humans do. All the parts of our bodies tend to coordinate together when we move. It's actually surprisingly difficult to move just a single isolated part of your body without any other part moving just a little bit. It's what makes dancers like these so darn impressive. Granted, I suspect that part of the weirdness of her movement here might be due to the fact that the animator's having to cheat to make her stand up at all. Look at the lower half of her body for the duration of this standing motion. You notice how her legs don't actually bend that much? Here, I'll play it back in reverse. It kind of looks like her knees bend slightly, and then her legs just stiffly sink into the floor, right? I'm guessing that is exactly what's happening. I would wager that this character model, or at least her skirt geometry, wasn't rigged to bend that way. Or maybe there was some other technical complication preventing her from actually being shown kneeling on the ground, so the animator had to cheat to make this shot work at all. And I say, hats off to you, sneaky animator who made this impossible thing work. You weren't the first, and you will not be the last. Oh, that's why the camera doesn't tilt down far enough for us to see the glowing thing she's looking at, isn't it? Because lowering the camera any further would reveal she's not actually crouched down and break the whole illusion. Oh, that's it, isn't it? Sorry, I got distracted. What was I talking about? Right, yes, Aerith moving like a robot. Okay, and it really doesn't help that her eyes are 2D textures pasted to her face that are only capable of looking straight ahead. Like, look at her head turn here. You see how her eyes just stay locked in place, staring forward for the entire move? That, again, is how robots move, not humans. I mean, try it yourself right now. Try turning to look 90 degrees to your left while keeping your eyes focused straight in front of your face the entire time. Is that not the most robot-feeling thing to do? Now, I could keep nitpicking this little stuff all day, but at this point, you get the idea, right? This is clearly a team of artists and engineers learning their way around a new animation medium, probably using the software equivalent of sticks and rocks compared to modern animation tools, so I think we can cut them some slack. In fact, let's say some nice things. I really like the way this extended shot is staged. The way it starts in close, spending a quiet, intimate moment with this flower girl, and then slowly begins to pull back as she walks out into the busy street, and then the bustle of this dark, grimy city suddenly intrudes on it, breaking our line of sight and just taking over the frame as the camera continues to pull back and the flower girl slowly disappears into this cityscape. And, by the way, side benefit of having all these nameless extras shrouded in moody shadow during this camera move? Much harder to see animation flaws. Except on this guy. Hey, I see that hitch in your walk cycle, random dude. Better get that looked at. But alright, we're done with character animation for a bit. The camera pulls back and back until we're looking over the entire city of Midgar. And just keep in mind, even though all of this does look very rough and early CG, this one extended shot has been a showcase of cinematography and character animation detail, relatively, that up to this point, Final Fantasy has never been capable of doing before. Now it's time for the second half of this opening cinematic, and this is where stuff gets really interesting. So the camera begins its flight back into town, intercut with some quick shots of a decelerating train. We fly down, down, down until we're back at ground level, and the camera settles into place just as this train pulls into the Sector 1 station. And the instant that train stops, the pre-rendered video portion of this intro ends, and we seamlessly-ish transition from a movie file to a static 2D image, the likes of which Final Fantasy VII is going to have us running around in front of for most of the game. But before we get to the action here, I'd like to direct your attention to these two guards, because you probably noticed those guards appeared on screen before this pre-rendered video ended. And they were not part of the pre-rendered video. Those were in-game character models being rendered in real time, being layered over the FMV. This is a pretty cool little trick they're pulling off here. I mean, when you think about it, almost every environment in this game is just a lavish pre-rendered 2D image being layered behind the invisible terrain your 3D characters are standing on. And there's no real reason that that background image can't be a video. But to make that work, the animators had to make sure that the gameplay camera, which was seeing and rendering these two guards, imitated the pre-rendered cutscene camera's movements perfectly to preserve the illusion of those 3D characters being grounded in that moving 2D background. It's a complicated trick, but quite effective at blurring the boundary between movie file and gameplay. Square would actually do this a lot in the PS1 days, and by Final Fantasy VIII they were getting real extra about it. Anyway, now that the pre-rendered video portion of this sequence is done, from here on all of the characters are going to be rendered in real time. And real-time story scenes in Final Fantasy VII have to deal with a handful of very tricky limitations. Limitation number 1. Because every animation in the game takes up some amount of memory, the devs had to try to limit the number of unique animations appearing in each scene, because the more animations needed in one single environment, the longer that environment was going to take to load. Limitation number 2. Because most of this game's environments are just pre-rendered 2D images, their ability to move the camera is extremely limited, and camera rotation is completely locked down. So pretty much all of the action in any given scene has to be played to one angle, kind of like a stage play. And limitation number 3. Final Fantasy VII's characters, they don't really have faces. I mean, they do, but it's nearly impossible to see them at the game's original resolution, and those faces weren't built to animate anyway, so unlike the character animation in the 16-bit games, which ran almost entirely on exaggerated facial expressions, Final Fantasy VII's characters have to rely on gestures and heavily exaggerated body language. And that's not actually a terrible trade-off in the end, but Not being able to use facial expression is a pretty big acting limitation. All of that to say, for the duration of this scene, the camera's barely gonna move, the character performances are gonna be created by stringing together short, reusable animations, and nobody's gonna be acting with their face. Okay? Okay. So first we see Biggs jump off the top of the train and throw a guard to the ground, which reads surprisingly clearly considering how far away he is from camera and how low resolution this game is. Next, Jesse runs in and takes out the second guard with a kick, which reads a little less clearly than the throw, despite being closer to camera, largely because the guard's body is kind of obscuring the move. They probably could have tried to clear the silhouettes a little better here, but I'm nitpicking. Notice how exaggerated all these animations are, though. With render resolution this low and character models this simplistic, there is no room for subtlety. The animators are having to push everything to the extreme to read clearly. Wedge hops off the train next, and then we see one of our main characters, Barrett, who looks back toward the train and gestures impatiently. The camera pedestals up a bit for the grand entrance of our main character, who flips down for a showy, absolutely cliché three-point landing. And there are a couple of details I really like in this moment. First, having Barrett run out, look up, and gesture toward the train is great not only for directing our attention to where Cloud's entrance is about to happen, but it also signals to the new player that Barrett is in a position of authority here, and it sets the tone for that early antagonistic dynamic between Barrett and Cloud. And the second thing I really like is that Cloud's unnecessarily acrobatic entrance is a perfectly fine way to make your player character feel like the coolest tough guy in the room, sort of. But in the long term, it also effectively sets up Cloud as the kind of person who would try to present himself as the coolest tough guy in the room, which is a surprising level of nuance for a clump of untextured faceless polygons hand-springing off a train. But yeah, then Barrett tells you to get moving, and there you are, playing Final Fantasy VII. Overall, as clunky as these PS1 graphics and early 3D animations are, I am surprised at how effective all of this still manages to be. That's kind of Final Fantasy VII in a nutshell, really. This brings us to the Final Fantasy VII Remake, a complete overhaul of the original game with the full power of modern AAA budgets, talent, and technology behind it. And of course, there are tons of improvements you can just see at a glance. The high-resolution graphics, the high-fidelity character models, the lighting, the shading, the effects, all of it gorgeous. But the two things that interest me most are all those brand new motion-captured character performances and all of the creative adjustments and changes designed to help this opening achieve its story goals in ways that the original couldn't. Let's see what 23 years of technological advance can do. We begin once more drifting in a star... Hang on. Yep, this is different. Okay. It turns out the remake diverges from the original intro sequence immediately. This time we open with a bird flying over a barren wasteland, and we get our first look at the Midgar skyline in broad daylight, almost completely shrouded in smog. We get a good look at the actual city itself during the daytime rush, all of the densely packed buildings, construction work, some kids riding bikes. Honestly, this new opening could probably have stood to cut 20 seconds too, but they do establish some important thematic imagery in these new opening minutes. A dead landscape, a bustling, smog-coated city, dead flowers specifically, and, as the sun goes down, the bright green glow of Midgar's Mako reactors illuminating the night. Now, all of this is stuff that fans of Final Fantasy VII are already well familiar with, but these 2 minutes sure do give the newcomer a lot more useful information about this setting than 45 seconds of stars do. And that spray of green particles from the reactor transitions us beautifully into the classic opening sequence we know and love. I would say we are off to a pretty strong start here. What's more, craning the camera down toward Aerith like this instead of simply crossfading affords us a much better look at what's actually happening in this scene. The Mako energy, the planet's very life force, we're soon going to learn, is seeping from a broken pipe in this dirty alley. And thanks to those 2 extra minutes we just saw, the new player can probably start connecting some dots on what's happening here, much more easily than they could have in the original anyway. And when we reach that close-up of her face, we can see that she's sort of lost in this glow, just basking in it, almost meditative, possibly praying. And when she opens her eyes to look into camera, just like she did 23 years before, man, what an incredible difference 2 decades and 4 console generations can make. This Aerith actually looks alive. Even in this tiny moment, there is so much more subtle fidelity to the performance. The way her eyelids stir slightly before she opens them, the way she first looks down at the pipes she was focused on previously before her gaze drifts up toward camera. The way not just her eyelids, but also her eyebrows move slightly as she looks up, and all of those subtle eye darts. especially when compared to the original Robo-Aerith. What incredible realistic acting fidelity here. Then we cut to the second shot, very similar to the original angle, but with some better framing, except this time, Aerith doesn't stand up right away. She just stays here, gazing at this leaking pipe, lingering in the moment. I really love this change. It's not a radical departure from the original, but the extra time spent lingering here gives us a chance to emotionally invest in this moment with her, in a way that you really couldn't in the original. And immediately after that, another change that I love, Aerith stands up not just because it's time to stand up, but because she suddenly senses a threat at the end of the alley. This is so good. For one, it gives her a motivated reason to stand up and leave this alley she was just having that moment in. Two, it further reinforces what the original game was trying to drive home as well, that this city is a hostile place. And best of all, three, if you already know a little bit about Aerith's story, then you know that she is always being watched. She is a person of interest in this town, and so seeing her get spooked by, well, seemingly nothing at the end of this dark alley helps to plant some seeds for her story way in advance. And again, the original version of this cutscene didn't do that at all. Also, by the way, that's how you animate standing up from a kneeling position right there. A+. Now here comes one of the biggest departures from the original opening sequence. Rather than maintaining one long shot from Aerith standing, to Aerith walking out of the alley, to zooming out over the city, to zooming back into the train station, instead, they cut to a new shot here and add an entirely new series of events. Aerith hastily walks out of the alley, nervously looking behind her to see if she's being followed, and accidentally bumps into a passerby, dropping some of her flowers. She kneels to pick them up as the rest of the city goes about its business around her, which exactly in line with the tone of the original, but one of the flowers gets trampled by a careless pedestrian. She slowly picks it up, cradles it in her hands, and lingers in this moment too, just like she had with that broken pipe in the alley. Now, the symbolism of this addition, combined with the shot of the dead flowers earlier, is not at all subtle. But for anybody experiencing Final Fantasy VII for the first time, and a lot of people are gonna be, drawing a direct visual parallel between how Aerith treats the trampled flower and how she treats that broken pipe leaking a weird green light, that I think is a worthwhile bit of thematic foreshadowing. The flower girl's planting seeds, deal with it. But okay, time for that big flyover shot. The camera pulls back and back and back and keeps going because the city is huge this time, and we get that view of the entirety of Midgard looking as gloriously ominous as ever. Then we swoop back into Sector 1, intercut with those same shots of a decelerating train, only this time the camera flight ends framing our main character atop the train. Again, arguably not a necessary change, but it is a nice little hint to the newcomers that something is about to happen when this train gets where it's going. And can we just take a moment to appreciate how far physics simulation has come? We already saw a ton of it before with Aerith's hair and her clothing, but look at that wind whipping through Cloud's hair and shirt there. It's awesome detail. Then we see the train pulling into the station, and right there, if I had to guess, is where we transition from the pre-rendered cinematic to rendering this scene in real time. Did I mention, by the way, that everything up until now was almost definitely a pre-rendered movie, just like the original game did? Because it probably is. And why shouldn't it be? I mean, everything we have seen so far in this sequence is meant to play out exactly the same every time. And the camera has to cover a ton of ground and show all of Midgar at a couple points. There is literally no reason to try to make this all render smoothly in real time when they could just play a pre-rendered movie and allow the actual level to load in the background so we're not kept waiting. A lot of modern games do that, by the way. And if my guess is correct, they are transitioning from movie file to in-game assets at almost the exact same point as the original, so that's fun. And if I'm wrong about the exact handoff moment, honestly, that's just a testament to how good real-time rendering has gotten in modern AAA games that it's this hard to tell. But here's where the remake diverges heavily from the original again, because this game isn't bound by any of the original's limitations. This is a fully 3D space being rendered in real time. Now the camera can move wherever the director wants, so this time they can actually shoot this scene using standard cinematography techniques. So, instead of a static angle showing everybody jumping off the train and fighting guards, this time we get an uninterrupted moving Steadicam shot of the attack from the guards' perspective. They patrol the platform a bit. We hear one of them get taken out off camera. The other hears this, turns to see the platform behind him now empty, so he gets suspicious and starts looking. And watching this all play out from the guard's perspective not only lends the scene more dramatic tension, it also gives Avalanche a chance to look more coordinated and stealthy. And Jesse still gets to knock a dude out with one kick. Then we get our introduction to Barrett, who is looking good. Barrett turns, and just like in the old days, he waves for Cloud to get his butt off the train already. And Cloud obliges just as before, in the most unnecessarily dramatic way possible. And yes, this entrance is absolutely absurd, but even ignoring the fact that it is a direct callback to the original train jump, remember that performative coolness and tough guy posturing are core elements of Cloud's character at this point in his arc.
But you know what I think?
Not interested.
What we are seeing right now is a facade, which we are hopefully being set up to eventually see through. And it does seem like Square's narrative team is leaning into that setup with some intent here.
Okay, that was pretty cool.
I am excited to see how they handle this. But yeah, that's it. Now we are playing Final Fantasy VII, but prettier. Only one cutscene into this game, and I am already really digging the creative adjustments they're making here. They have not only recreated the original sequence with more detail, but actually added more information and nuance, largely through the animated character performances and cinematography. That's what makes me so excited for this remake. Because good or bad, this return to Midgar represents a huge animation opportunity. Final Fantasy VII's story is packed with some really juicy character scenes that the original game could only deliver through text boxes and simplistic pantomime acting. There is so much untapped potential for nuanced animated acting in those scenes, and this remake has the chance to go back and make good on that potential. I am so jealous of the animators in charge of reimagining the scene where Cloud talks with Aerith in the church, or that scene where the party's caught in Shinra Tower and they're all talking to each other through the walls. Or, the scene where Cloud is telling his version of what happened 5 years ago, and Tifa's just sitting in that room knowing his version is wrong, not knowing why, but not saying anything. Imagine the blend of emotions happening in her head throughout that scene. That is an animated acting goldmine. I'm calling it right now. Whenever that scene happens, watch Tifa's face. That's one of the coolest character acting opportunities in this whole dang game, and they better not miss it. I am sorry, I got excited. I don't know if this game is going to be great or a disappointment. All I know is that this kind of opportunity for comparative animation study does not come along often, and I cannot wait to get started. I'm actually going to be playing this remake for the first time over on our other channel, PlayFrame, starting on Monday. And if you have enjoyed me nerding out about Final Fantasy VII animation and want to hear hours more of it, well, I hope you'll join me. And thank you very much to Canvas Wolf Doll for suggesting this topic. I had so much fun digging into this. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future animation analysis video, then consider supporting the show like all of these good people listed here. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.